O Pioneers, Part 4, The White Mulberry Tree, Chapter 6. The Church has always held that life is for the living. On Saturday, while half the village of St. Agnes was mourning for Amédée and preparing the funeral black for his burial on Monday, the other half was busy with white dresses and white veils for the great confirmation service tomorrow, when the bishop was to confirm a class of 100 boys and girls. Father Duquesne divided his time between the living and the dead. All day Saturday, the church was a scene of bustling activity, a little hushed by the thought of Amédée. The choir were busy rehearsing a mass of Rossini, which they had studied and practiced for this occasion. The women were trimming the altar. The boys and girls were bringing flowers. On Sunday morning, the bishop was to drive overland to St. Agnes from Hanover, and Emile Bergson had been asked to take the place of one of Amédée's cousins in the cavalcade of 40 French boys who were to ride across country to meet the bishop's carriage. At 6 o'clock on Sunday morning, the boys met at the church. As they stood holding their horses by the bridle, they talked in low tones of their dead comrade. They kept repeating that Amédée had always been a good boy, glancing toward the red brick church which had played so large a part in Amédée's life. Had been the scene of his most serious moments and of his happiest hours. He had played and wrestled and sung and courted under its shadow. Only 3 weeks ago, he had proudly carried his baby there to be christened. They could not doubt that the invisible arm was still about Amédée, that through the church on earth he had passed to the church triumphant, the goal of the hopes and faith of so many hundred years. When the word was given to mount, the young men rode at a walk out of the village. But once out among the wheat fields in the morning sun, their horses and their own youth got the better of them. A wave of zeal and fiery enthusiasm swept over them. They longed for a Jerusalem to deliver. The thud of their galloping hoofs interrupted many a country breakfast and brought many a woman and child to the door of the farmhouses as they passed. 5 miles east of St. Agnes, they met the bishop in his open carriage, attended by 2 priests. Like one man, the boys swung off their hats in a broad salute and bowed their heads as the handsome old man lifted his 2 fingers in the episcopal blessing. The horsemen closed about the carriage like a guard, and whenever a restless horse broke from control and shot down the road ahead of the body, the bishop laughed and rubbed his plump hands together. "What fine boys," he said to his priests. "The church still has her Calvary." As the troop swept past the graveyard half a mile east of the town, the first frame church of the parish had stood there. Old Pierre Seguin was already out with his pick and spade, digging Amédée's grave. He knelt and uncovered as the bishop passed. The boys, with one accord, looked away from old Pierre to the red church on the hill, with the gold cross flaming on its steeple. Mass was at 11. While the church was filling, Emile Bergson waited outside, watching the wagons and buggies drive up the hill. After the bell began to ring, he saw Frank Ciabatta ride up on horseback and tie his horse to the hitch bar. Marie, then, was not coming. Emile turned and went into the church. Amédée's was the only empty pew, and he sat down in it. Some of Amédée's cousins were there, dressed in black and weeping. When all the pews were full, the old men and boys packed the open space at the back of the church, kneeling on the floor. There was scarcely a family in town that was not represented in the confirmation class, by a cousin at least. The new communicants, with their clear, reverent faces, were beautiful to look upon as they entered in a body and took the front benches reserved for them. Even before the Mass began, the air was charged with feeling. The choir had never sung so well, and Raoul Marcel, in the Gloria, drew even the bishop's eyes to the organ loft. For the offertory he sang Gounod's Ave Maria, always spoken of in St. Agnes as the Ave Maria. Emile began to torture himself with questions about Marie. Was she ill? Had she quarreled with her husband? Was she too unhappy to find comfort even here? Had she perhaps thought that he would come to her? Was she waiting for him? Overtaxed by excitement and sorrow as he was, the rapture of the service took hold upon his body and mind. As he listened to Raoul, he seemed to emerge from the conflicting emotions which had been whirling him about and sucking him under. He felt as if a clear light broke upon his mind, and with it a conviction that good was, after all, stronger than evil, and that good was possible to men. He seemed to discover that there was a kind of rapture in which he could love forever without faltering and without sin. He looked across the heads of the people at Frank Ciabatta with calmness. That rapture was for those who could feel it. For people who could not, it was non-existent. He coveted nothing that was Frank Ciabatta's. The spirit he had met in music was his own. Frank Ciabatta had never found it, would never find it if he lived beside it for 1,000 years, would have destroyed it if he had found it, as Herod slew the innocents, as Rome slew the martyrs. Sancta Maria, wailed Raoul from the organ loft. Ora pro nobis. And it did not occur to Emile that anyone had ever reasoned thus before, that music had ever before given a man this equivocal revelation.